Hi, today I'd like to share one of Victor Hugo's most loved poems with you, a poem that is taught in almost all French schools. Let's read Victor Hugo's Demain together and try and understand it. I usually start with a background and context when I talk about poems, but this time I'm going to start with the poem itself. And if you want to hear about the context, stay with me, we'll get there. Victor Hugo, the poet, starts by talking about his imminent trip, a day's walk. And I invite you to think of someone you love dearly as you join the poet through the first verse. Demain de l'aube, à l'heure où blanchit la campagne. Tomorrow at dawn, in the hour when the countryside becomes white. So with this verse, he talks of his intention to travel and the time of departure. At dawn, early in the morning. Je partirai, vois-tu, je sais que tu m'attends. Look at this interesting verse. I will leave, you see, I know that you are waiting for me. He is addressing his love and he is reassuring her that he will be with her soon. J'irai par la forêt, j'irai par la montagne. I will go by the forest, I will go by the mountain. It is as though the poet has to get past the forest and the mountain to finally reach his love. Even though the poet talks of nature, he mentions them without really describing the forest or the mountains. Je ne puis demeurer loin de toi plus longtemps. Just like any two people in love, the poet says, I cannot stay far away from you any longer. But suddenly, in the second stanza, you'll see the tone of the poem change. Let's see if you catch on to what is happening. Je marcherai, les yeux fixés sur mes pensées. The poet says, I will walk, eyes fixed on my thoughts. Nothing around him matters. He is focused on reaching his destination. Sans rien voir au dehors, sans entendre aucun bruit. Without seeing anything outside, nor hearing any noise. Here the poet is indifferent to the sounds and sights around him. The poet has completely cut himself off from the outside world. Seul, inconnu, le dos courbé, les mains croisées. Alone, unknown, the back curved and hands crossed. He calls himself inconnu, unknown, which shows complete solitude. He is walking with his back bent and arms crossed like a meditative position where he is concentrating on nothing but his love. Triste, et le jour pour moi sera comme la nuit. Sad, and the day for me will be like the night. The poet passes from light to darkness, triste, sadness, a reflection of the poet's state of mind. Je ne regarderai ni l'or du soir qui tombe. I will not look at the gold of the evening which falls. L'or du soir, gold of the evening, is a metaphor representing sunset. This also shows that it was a day-long journey that the poet undertook to reach his destination. The double negation, ni, in this verse and the next, shows the loneliness of the poet. Ni les voiles au loin descendant vers Harfleur, nor the faraway sails descending towards Harfleur. Now there is a change in scene. Hugo has passed the forest and the mountains and now faces water. He has reached Harfleur, where his love is. And this is where the poet presents the twist in the tale. Et quand j'arriverai, je mettrai sur ta tombe. And when I arrive, I will put on your tomb. That's when you realize the poet is talking to his love, who is no longer alive, as he plans his trip to her tomb. Un bouquet de houver et de bruyère en fleurs. A green bouquet of holly and flowering heather. The last line of the poem is symbolic. Houver et bruyère en fleurs. Holly and heather, plants that are evergreen. They stay green all through the year and in a way symbolize eternity. Hugo intentionally chooses these two plants to celebrate his love's eternal life. Through his poem and his spirit, he makes her immortal. Now let me tell you about the context and background of this poem, the touching incident that drove Victor Hugo to write it. Victor Hugo had 5 children, out of which only 4 survived. Of the 4, his favorite was Léopoldine. He loved her the most because he believed she was a reflection of him. She was well educated, she recited poetry, loved music, and he could discuss his work with her. At the age of 16, she fell in love with Charles Vacquerie. Hugo was against her marrying Charles because he did not want her to leave him. At 19, he grudgingly agrees to her marriage and is heartbroken to see her leave. Such was his love for her. 6 months after her marriage, a pregnant Léopoldine is on a boat with her husband. Caught in a wind, the boat capsizes and Léopoldine sinks because of her heavy skirt, and the poor girl doesn't know how to swim. Charles tries his best to save her, but in vain. Tragically, they both die. Victor Hugo learned of Léopoldine's death through a newspaper, and her death deeply affected him. This poem, written on her 4th death anniversary, is a song of love. Hugo immortalizes his dead daughter Léopoldine through the power of poetry. In this poem, Hugo describes his visit to his daughter's tomb. This poem, Demain is found in the collection Contemplations. Let's get back to the poem and look at the structure of the poem. You will see that it has 3 stanzas with 4 verses each. Each verse is written in Alexandrin, meaning it has 12 syllables. You can also see alternate rhymes, for example, campagne, montagne, attends, longtemps. The tone of the poem is twofold, one of promise and hope, and then that of darkness and loneliness. While reading the poem, you will see that it is an expression of love, of mourning, pain, and sadness. You must take note that the verbs constructed in future show the different stages of his journey. In verse 2, he says, Je partirai, I will leave. In verse 5, he says, Je marcherai, I will walk. And later he says, J'arriverai, I will arrive. I would recommend that you read Hugo's poem again and accompany him on this emotional trip to his daughter's tomb. Hugo was truly a romantic poet. You can see in this poem solitude, nature, emotions, which are all characteristics of the Romantic era. Some experts say that Léopoldine's death was a turning point in Hugo's writing style and political leanings. After she passed away, he started writing some of the darker and heavier pieces. Till then, he seemed to be pro-monarchy and seemed to have an elitist perspective. But after Léopoldine's passing, he started seeing things from the perspective of the poor, the oppressed, and the suffering. All this can be seen in pieces such as Les Miserables. And if you're ever in Paris, make sure you visit Hugo's home, which is now a museum, and you will see the way Hugo has tried to keep Léopoldine's memory alive by preserving things like the wreath from her wedding. It truly is a tribute to this father's love for his daughter. While the experts can argue about what really changed Hugo's perspective and writing style, I'd like to know your opinion in the comment section. I'm just glad we have this poem, even though it was born out of Hugo's pain. I really hope you enjoyed this poem as much as I did. I'm not an expert at poetry, but if you have a poem you would like me to explore and explain, I'd love to do that. So drop that in the suggestions below too. Keep reading, keep learning, and keep sharing.